A hand closed around my wrist before I even saw him coming. I had been standing at the edge of the dance floor for less than 10 minutes, and already a stranger's fingers were pulling me back a step, away from the crowd, away from the man who had just leaned in too close and asked my name. My drink almost spilled. My heart jumped into my throat. I turned, ready to snap at whoever thought they could grab me like that, and found myself looking up into a pair of dark eyes that did not blink. "Nobody looks at what is mine," he said, low and even, like he was stating a fact about the weather. I laughed, because it was the only thing my body knew how to do in that moment. "Excuse me? I don't even know you." He did not answer. Instead, he slid off his jacket, black and heavy, and smelling faintly of cedar, and settled it over my shoulders, covering the dress my best friend Nora had talked me into wearing an hour earlier. The gesture should have felt like an insult. It felt like something else entirely, something that made my skin warm under the fabric. "Adrian," a voice near the bar murmured to someone else, hushed, almost frightened. I caught it over the music, the way you catch your own name across a crowded room. "That's Adrian Voss." I did not know who Adrian Voss was. I would learn soon enough that not knowing was rare, and that everyone else in that club had gone quiet and careful the moment he crossed the room toward me. Nora appeared at my elbow, her eyes wide, her mouth half open, like she wanted to say something and couldn't decide what. She grabbed my arm the same way the stranger by the bar had tried to grab me, except her grip was full of warning. "Elena," she whispered, "do you have any idea who that is?" "No," I said, "but I'm starting to think I should sit down." The man beside me, Adrian, did not seem to notice Nora at all. His attention stayed fixed on me, the way a lamp stays fixed on a single spot of a dark room. Up close, he was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of stillness that made everyone else in that club look like they were vibrating. He wore no visible jewelry, no logo, nothing that announced money. He didn't need to. Money and power came off him like heat off a stove, quiet and impossible to ignore. "You've had a long week," he said. "It wasn't a question. You came here to forget it." "How would you know that?" "Because you keep glancing at the door like you're already thinking about leaving." A faint curve touched the corner of his mouth. "And because the man who bought you that drink is still watching you from the bar, wondering if he made a mistake." I turned my head. The man from earlier, the one who had leaned too close, was indeed still watching, but not at me anymore. His eyes were locked on Adrian, and his face had gone the color of old paper. "You scared him," I said. "He should be scared. He touched something that isn't his to touch." The words should have made me angry. I had spent my whole life being underestimated, being talked over, being treated like decoration in rooms full of men who thought they owned the air. I opened my mouth to tell this stranger exactly where he could put his jacket and his claims, and then his hand found mine, warm and sure, and every sharp word I had prepared died somewhere in my throat. "I'm not asking your permission to protect you," he said, quieter now, "just for me. I'm telling you it's already done. You don't even know my name." "Elena," he said it, like he had known it for years. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him. Nora hadn't said it loud enough for him to hear from across the room, and yet there it was, sitting easily on his tongue like he had practiced saying it in private. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied me, the kind of look that made me feel like he was reading a book he had already finished once, and was now reading again, slower, to catch the parts he had missed the first time. "I make it my business to know things," he finally said, "especially things that matter." Nora tugged at my sleeve, harder this time. "Elena, we should go." "In a minute," I said, and I felt him watch the exchange, felt the corner of his mouth lift again, like he found the whole scene entertaining, a queen watching her subjects fuss. "Your friend is smart," Adrian said. "She knows danger when she sees it standing next to you." He leaned down slightly, close enough that his words brushed against my ear, low enough that only I could hear them over the bass shaking the floor. "But you're not going to run, are you?" I should have run. Every instinct that had kept me safe for 26 years was screaming at me to walk away from a man who spoke about owning people the way other men spoke about owning cars. And yet my feet stayed rooted to that spot, and some reckless, curious part of me leaned instead of leaned away. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Tonight? Nothing." His eyes moved over my face, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing it. "Tonight. I just wanted every man in this building to understand that you are not available." "That's not your decision to make." "No," he agreed. "It's yours. I'm simply making sure no one else tries to make it for you before you've had the chance." There was something in the way he said it that unsettled me and steadied me at the same time, a contradiction I couldn't untangle. I had come to this club to forget a bad week, a bad job, a life that felt like it was happening to someone else while I watched from a distance. Instead, I was standing wrapped in a stranger's jacket, listening to him talk about ownership like it was a form of protection, and some small, exhausted part of me wanted to believe him. "I need to sit down," I said, mostly to Nora, mostly to give myself an excuse to step back and breathe. Adrian let go of my hand immediately. No resistance, no argument, though I noticed the way his jaw tightened, just slightly, like letting go cost him something. "Go," he said. "Sit, drink water. I'll be here. I didn't ask you to wait for me. You didn't have to." Nora pulled me toward a booth at the far end of the club, and I went, grateful for the distance, grateful for the chance to think, without those dark eyes studying my face like a puzzle he intended to solve completely. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the cool leather of the booth and made myself breathe. "Okay," Nora said, sliding in across from me, her voice pitched low, even though the music made privacy easy. "That man is Adrian Voss. His family runs half this city. People don't say his name loudly, because they're afraid something bad happens to people who say his name loudly." "That's insane." "That's real." She glanced over my shoulder toward the bar, where Adrian stood exactly where he said he would, not looking at us, not looking at anyone, simply existing in that spot like a fixed point the whole room orbited around, without realizing it. "Elena, I'm serious. Men like that don't put a jacket on a stranger for fun." He looked at you like he already decided something. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was nothing, a strange man's strange joke played out over one drink and one dance floor. But my skin still remembered the weight of his jacket, the warmth of his hand, the way his voice had wrapped around my name, like he had been saving it for the right moment to use it. I looked past Nora's shoulder. Adrian was watching me again, patient, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world, and intended to spend every second of it exactly where he stood. I did not know it yet, but that night was the last night my life would make sense the old way. I finished my water. I let Nora talk me into staying another hour, and when I finally left the club, stepping out into the cold air with his jacket still around my shoulders because I had forgotten, in the rush of goodbyes, to give it back, I told myself it meant nothing. I believed that for exactly one more day. Outside, the street was quiet, the kind of quiet a city only gets after midnight, when even the taxis seem to slow down out of respect. Nora hailed a car and climbed in first, waving for me to hurry. I turned to take one last look at the club, half expecting Adrian to have vanished the way strange, impossible things vanish once you step outside and the night air clears your head. He hadn't vanished. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between amusement and something far more serious. "Elena," he called, just loud enough to carry across the street. I turned. "Keep the jacket," he said. "Consider it a promise." A promise of what? His answer came simple and certain, the kind of certainty that should have frightened me, and instead settled somewhere warm in my chest. "That this isn't over." I got into the car without another word, my pulse loud in my own ears, the jacket heavy and warm around my shoulders like a hand still resting there. Nora asked what he said. I told her nothing important. But I sat the rest of the ride home with my fingers pressed against the collar, breathing in cedar and something I couldn't name, and I understood, somewhere underneath the disbelief, that Adrian Voss did not make promises he had no intention of keeping. Nora leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes, exhausted from the night, but I stayed awake the whole ride, replaying every second of it. I thought about the man at the bar who had backed away the moment Adrian crossed the room, the way his face had drained of color like he had just seen something, he would remember for the rest of his life. I thought about the whispers that had rippled through the crowd, quick and nervous, the kind of whispers people only use for things they are afraid will notice them if they speak too loudly. I thought about the way Adrian had said my name, certain and unhurried, as if he had carried it in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment to take it out. By the time the car pulled up outside my building, my mind had built and dismissed a dozen different explanations. A coincidence, a trick, a rich man's game, the kind bored people with too much money played on strangers, just to feel something new. I told myself any one of those had to be true, because the alternative, that a man like that had actually been watching me before that night, was too strange to hold on to for long. I said goodnight to Nora, and climbed the stairs to my apartment slowly, the jacket still wrapped around my shoulders, my keys cold in my hand. Inside, I hung it on the back of a chair instead of a hanger, telling myself I would return it the next time I saw Nora, though some part of me already knew I had no intention of giving it back so easily. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without turning on the lights, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my window, trying to talk myself out of the feeling that something in my life had just shifted, quietly and permanently, without asking my permission. Sleep came slowly, and when it finally arrived, it came full of dark eyes that did not blink, and a voice that repeated the same 4 words over and over, low and certain, like a vow spoken only once but meant to last a lifetime. Nobody looks at what is mine. I woke before my alarm, disoriented, my hand already reaching for the jacket draped over the chair, as if to check it had not disappeared in the night. It was still there, heavier somehow, in the gray morning light, more real than the memory of the club, more real than the version of the night I had spent hours convincing myself was harmless. I made coffee. I told myself I had work to think about, a normal Tuesday to survive, a life that had nothing to do with dangerous men and whispered names. I carried my cup to the window out of habit, the way I did most mornings, watching the street below wake up slowly, delivery trucks and early joggers, and the usual gray hush of a city not yet ready for the day. That was when I saw it. The car was long and black, polished enough to catch the weak morning light, parked directly across from my building, in a spot where no one ever parked. Not delivery vehicles, not visitors, not even the residents who lived 2 floors above me, and fought over street parking every single week. The windows were tinted dark enough that I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to see inside to know, with a certainty that settled cold and sure in my stomach, exactly whose car it was. My coffee cup trembled slightly in my hand, and I understood, without needing anyone to tell me, that whatever had started the night before was only just beginning. The car followed me to work. I noticed it 3 blocks from my apartment, sliding into traffic 2 cars behind mine, matching my speed exactly, turning when I turned, slowing when I slowed. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles ached. I told myself it was a coincidence, that plenty of black cars existed in this city, that I was imagining connections where none existed. But when I pulled into the parking garage beneath my office building, the car eased to a stop at the curb outside, and stayed there, engine running, exactly like it had outside my apartment less than an hour earlier. I spent the whole morning unable to focus, my mind circling back again and again to dark eyes and a low voice, and 4 words that felt more like a warning than a compliment. By lunch, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. By the time I stepped out for coffee, the car was gone, and I told myself that was the end of it, a strange coincidence finally resolved. It was not the end of it. He was standing outside the coffee shop when I walked out, leaning against the brick wall like he had been waiting there for hours, and had nowhere else in the world he needed to be. Adrian Voss, dressed simply this time, no jacket, just a dark shirt that made him look less like the dangerous name Nora had whispered, and more like an ordinary man who happened to carry an extraordinary amount of quiet authority in the way he stood. "You're not subtle," I said, stopping a few feet away, my coffee suddenly forgotten in my hand. "I never claimed to be." He pushed off the wall, unhurried, and fell into step beside me as I started walking, uninvited but not unwelcome, a contradiction I was growing tired of feeling. "How was your morning, Elena?" "Strange. I kept seeing the same black car everywhere I went." "Did it bother you?" "It should have. But it didn't. It wasn't a question." He said it the way he said most things, certain, already knowing the answer before I gave it. I hated how accurate he was. "What do you want, Adrian?" "I told you last night." "Nothing, yet." He glanced sideways at me, and for a moment, the hardness in his expression softened into something almost boyish, almost amused. "I wanted to see you again, before you convinced yourself I wasn't real." "You're very real. You're also very much a stranger who put a car outside my apartment without asking." "I don't ask for things that already belong to me." The words hit differently in daylight than they had under club lights and loud music. In daylight, without the noise to soften them, they sounded less like flattery and more like a warning wrapped in velvet. I stopped walking. He stopped a half step later, turning to face me fully, patient, in a way that made my skin prickle. "I don't belong to you," I said. "I met you 12 hours ago." "You're right." He inclined his head slightly, conceding the point with none of the resistance I expected. "You don't belong to me yet, but I've been watching you for longer than 12 hours, Elena, and I think somewhere underneath that anger, you already suspect that." My stomach dropped, the same cold drop from that morning when I'd seen the car outside my window. What does that mean? Watching me? He studied me for a long moment before answering, weighing something, deciding how much truth I could hold without running. "It means I noticed you months ago, at a gallery opening you attended with a coworker, at a market 3 streets from your apartment, on a Sunday, buying flowers you never bought again after that one time. I noticed you long before last night, and last night was simply the first time I let myself approach you." I should have been terrified. Some rational, self-protective part of me screamed that a man admitting to watching me for months was not romantic, was not flattering, was something closer to danger, dressed up in a calm voice and expensive tailoring, and yet standing there on a busy sidewalk with people moving around us like water around stone, all I could manage to feel was a strange, unwelcome thrill that someone had noticed me at all, after years of feeling invisible in every room I entered. "That's not normal," I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. I'm not a normal man, Elena. I never claimed to be one." "Then what are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, a small gesture, barely a touch, and yet it sent a jolt through me that made my breath catch. "Someone who has spent a long time being very careful about the things I let myself want," he said. "And someone who has decided he is done being careful about you." I should have walked away, I told myself, later that night and many nights after, that I should have walked away right then, turned my back on his certainty, and his careful watching, and the way his voice made promises sound like facts. Instead, I asked the question that would change everything. "What happens now?" A slow smile crossed his face, not triumphant, not smug, something closer to relief, like he had been holding his breath waiting for me to ask exactly that. "Now," he said, "you let me take you to dinner, and you let yourself find out who I really am, instead of only the parts whispered by strangers in a club." I said yes. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more, the same curiosity that made people slow down at car accidents, or watch storms roll in from a safe distance. I did not yet understand that I had already stepped past the point of safe distance, that the moment I said yes to dinner, I had said yes to a world I knew almost nothing about. That evening, he picked me up himself, driving the same black car that had trailed me all morning, and for the first time, I sat inside it instead of watching it from a window. The interior smelled like him, cedar, and something darker underneath, and the seats were soft enough that I sank into them without meaning to relax. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere quiet. I want to talk without an audience." We drove across the city in comfortable silence, the kind I hadn't expected from a man who inspired fear in strangers with a single glance. He didn't fill the quiet with unnecessary words. He simply drove, one hand loose on the wheel, occasionally glancing at me like he was still making sure I was real, still there, still choosing to stay in the car with him despite every warning bell that should have been ringing. The restaurant was small, tucked behind an unmarked door on a street I had never noticed before, the kind of place that clearly did not advertise and did not need to. A man at the entrance nodded to Adrian with a familiarity that told me he was known there, respected there, perhaps even feared there. though the staff treated him with nothing but quiet courtesy as they led us to a private table near the back. "You come here often," I said, more observation than question. "I own it," he said simply, and something in the easy way he said it told me this was only the smallest fraction of what he owned. Over dinner, I learned pieces of him, the way you learn pieces of a puzzle, before you understand the full picture. He told me about a father who had built an empire out of nothing and left it to a son who had never wanted softness, only strength. He told me, carefully, in words chosen with obvious restraint, that his family's business existed in the spaces most people preferred not to look at too closely, and that the fear his name inspired was not an accident but a tool, one he had learned to wield the way other men learned to wield charm. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, near the end of the meal, watching me with the same unblinking attention he had shown the night before. I thought about the question honestly before answering, turning it over the way you turn over something sharp to see where it might cut you. "I think I should be," I said. "I think that's the honest answer." "But you're not." "No," I admitted, "I'm not. And I don't know what that says about me." He reached across the table and took my hand, not possessively this time, but gently, like he understood the difference mattered to me, even if he wasn't sure it mattered to him. "It says you're paying attention to something other than fear," he said. "It says you see something worth staying for." I did not have an answer for that. I only knew that when he drove me home that night and walked me to my door, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him in the cold evening air, I did not want him to leave nearly as much as I should have. He didn't kiss me. He simply pressed his lips to my forehead, brief and warm, and told me he would call the next day. He kept that promise, the way he seemed to keep every promise he made, and over the following days, I learned that being claimed by Adrian Voss meant more than a jacket over my shoulders in a crowded club. It meant a black car appearing wherever I went, not as a threat, but as a quiet, constant presence. It meant men who had once looked at me too long in public, now looked away entirely, some unspoken warning having traveled faster than I could understand. It meant my ordinary, overlooked life had quietly become extraordinary, whether I was ready for it or not. Before he left that night, I asked him one more question, the one that had been sitting quietly under my tongue since he first sat down across from me. "Why me?" "You could have anyone, you must know that." He considered the question with the same weight he seemed to give everything, unhurried, unwilling to answer with an easy line just to please me. "Because everyone else looks at me and sees the name first," he said finally. "The family, the fear, the things people whisper. You looked at me last night like you were trying to decide if I was worth being afraid of at all. Not because you'd already heard the stories, but because you wanted to see for yourself. Nobody does that anymore. Not with me." Maybe I just wasn't paying attention to the whispers. Maybe, he agreed, and there was something almost fond in the way he said it, like my ignorance of his reputation had been, from the very beginning, the thing that drew him closer, instead of pushing him away. Or maybe you were the first person in a long time who looked past it without meaning to. I turned that thought over on my walk up the stairs to my apartment, long after he had driven away, long after the taillights of his car had disappeared around the corner of my street. It should have frightened me, how easily I was letting a stranger rearrange the shape of my ordinary life. Instead, it settled somewhere warm, somewhere I had not let anyone reach in a very long time. Nora called before I had even taken off my shoes, her voice sharp with impatience. "Well? Tell me everything. Where did he take you?" I told her about the restaurant behind the unmarked door, the quiet respect the staff had shown him, the way he had spoken about his father with a careful kind of restraint that told me there was far more pain buried under that story than he had let on. I told her about his hand closing over mine across the table, warm and certain, and the way he had kissed my forehead instead of my mouth, like he was pacing himself, like he understood that rushing me would break whatever fragile thing had started to grow between us. "Elena," Nora said slowly, "I need you to hear me. I looked him up after we got home last night. I mean really looked him up. The things people say about his family, the things the news won't print outright, but everyone understands anyway. This isn't a rich man with a temper. This is a dangerous world, and you just stepped into the middle of it wearing his jacket." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I had spent the whole day trying to talk myself out of the pull I felt toward him, listing every reason a reasonable woman would run in the opposite direction, None of the reasons had worked. I know it's dangerous, Nora. I'm not stupid. I just don't know how to explain that it doesn't feel like danger when I'm standing next to him. It feels like the opposite. It feels safe. That's exactly what danger wants you to feel, she said quietly, and I had no answer for that either, because some small, honest part of me suspected she was right. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind circling through everything he had told me and everything he hadn't. In the morning, I found a single white flower resting against my apartment door. No card, no note, nothing to explain how it had gotten there without a sound. I knew, without needing to ask, exactly who had left it, and I understood, standing there in the doorway, with the flower pressed carefully between my fingers, that whatever had begun between us was no longer something I could pretend was ordinary. I did not yet know that somewhere across the city, men who hated Adrian Voss with the kind of hatred that outlives reason had already begun to notice the woman he had claimed in front of an entire club, and had already begun to wonder how best to use her against him. A man was standing across the street from my apartment when I stepped outside, and unlike the black car I had grown used to, this one did not belong to Adrian. I noticed him because he wasn't looking at his phone, or waiting for a bus, or doing any of the ordinary things people do while standing on a street corner. He was watching my building, still and patient, his eyes moving from my door to the black car parked half a block away, the one Adrian always left for me now, a quiet, constant shadow I had stopped questioning weeks ago. When my eyes met the stranger's, he didn't look away. He held my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, then turned and walked in the opposite direction, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world and no reason at all to rush. I told myself it was nothing. I had been telling myself that a lot over the past few weeks, ever since a man named Adrian Voss had draped his jacket over my shoulders and rearranged the shape of my entire life. But something about the stranger's stillness, the deliberate way he had let himself be seen, stayed with me all the way to work, sitting cold and heavy in my chest, like a stone I couldn't swallow. By the time Adrian called that afternoon, I had almost convinced myself to say nothing about it, not wanting to sound paranoid, not wanting to give him another reason to tighten the careful, watchful world he had built around me. But the moment I heard his voice, calm and warm, asking how my day had gone, the words spilled out before I could stop them. There was a man outside my building this morning. He was just standing there, watching, and when I looked at him, he didn't look away first. He just walked off, like he wanted me to notice him. The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a second, but it was long enough for me to understand that whatever calm had been in his voice a moment earlier was gone. "Describe him," Adrian said, his tone flat now, stripped of warmth, all business. I did, as best I could, the dark coat, the gray at his temples, the way he had stood with his hands loose at his sides, like a man used to waiting without growing impatient. When I finished, Adrian was quiet again, and I could hear him breathing, slow and controlled, the way people breathe when they are working very hard to stay calm. "I'm sending someone to your building right now," he said. "Don't leave your apartment until they arrive." "I mean that, Elena. You're scaring me." "Good," he said, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice cracked slightly around the edges, betraying something underneath the control he wore so easily. "I need you scared enough to listen to me. There are people in this city who would use you to hurt me, and I have spent weeks making sure no one dared to try. If someone is watching your building now, it means someone has decided the risk is worth it, and that terrifies me more than anything has terrified me in a very long time." I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch, my legs suddenly unwilling to hold me steady. "Who would do that?" "A man named Victor Kane," Adrian said, the name coming out of him like something bitter he needed to spit out before it poisoned him further. "My family and his have been enemies for longer than either of us has been alive. He has wanted what I have for years, and he has never once cared about the cost of taking it. And now he knows about me." "Now he knows about you," Adrian confirmed, and the quiet fury in those 4 words told me everything I needed to know about how dangerous that knowledge truly was. 2 of his men arrived within 20 minutes, quiet and professional, one stationed outside my door, and one somewhere in the lobby I never saw again after that first day. I spent the rest of that week feeling like a prisoner in my own life, watched from every angle, escorted to work, escorted home, unable to walk to the corner market for milk without someone falling into step a few feet behind me. I understood why. I even understood, in some rational corner of my mind, that Adrian's caution came from love, not control. But it did not make the walls feel any less close. Adrian came to see me every evening that week, sometimes for only a few minutes, sometimes staying until well past midnight, sitting beside me on the couch with his jacket off and his guard, however briefly, lowered. He told me more about Victor Kane during those quiet hours than I think he had told anyone in years, the old rivalry between their families, a business rooted so deep in the city's history that untangling it now would mean tearing apart half the streets I walked every day. He told me about a brother he had lost years earlier, a casualty of the same feud that now threatened to swallow me whole, and I understood, watching the grief move behind his eyes, that his fear for my safety was not paranoia, it was memory. "I won't let what happened to him happen to you," he said one night, his hand tight around mine, his voice rough in a way I hadn't heard before. "I would burn this entire city down before I let that happen." "That's not comforting, Adrian." "It's not meant to comfort you. It's meant to be true." I believed him. That frightened me more than Victor Kane's name ever could, the realization that I had fallen for a man capable of burning down a city for my sake, and that some reckless, aching part of me was grateful for it, rather than horrified. The confrontation I had been dreading arrived on a Thursday, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. I had gone to a small market 3 blocks from my apartment, one of the few errands Adrian's men still allowed me to run alone during daylight hours, insisting I needed some scrap of normal life to hold on to. I was standing in the produce aisle, reaching for a bag of apples, when a voice behind me made every hair on my arms rise at once. "Elena, isn't it?" I turned slowly. The man standing behind me was not the one who had watched my building days earlier. This man was older, silver-haired, dressed in a suit too expensive for a grocery store, his smile pleasant in a way that didn't reach his eyes at all. "I don't know you," I said, taking a careful step back. "No, but I know you. Or rather, I know what you've become." His smile widened, unhurried, cruel in its patience. Adrian's little discovery, his weakness, dressed up as a woman he thinks he loves. "I think you should leave. I think you should listen." He stepped closer, and though he made no move to touch me, the sheer proximity of him made my pulse hammer against my throat. "My name is Victor Kane. I imagine Adrian has mentioned me by now, probably in the middle of the night, probably with that particular kind of fear men like him try to hide behind anger. I want you to understand something, Elena, because I don't think he has been entirely honest with you about the world he's dragged you into. I understand it perfectly well. Do you?" His head tilted slightly, amused. "Do you understand that you are, at this exact moment, standing in a public market with no one watching over you, because his men grew careless just long enough for me to find that gap? Do you understand how easily, how very easily, this moment could go a different way?" My mouth went dry. I glanced toward the entrance, calculating distance, calculating whether I could run before he could stop me, though something in his relaxed posture told me he had no intention of touching me here, in daylight, surrounded by witnesses. "I'm not going to hurt you today," he said, reading the fear on my face with obvious satisfaction. "Today I simply wanted to introduce myself. I wanted you to understand that Adrian's protection has a hole in it, and that I found the hole faster than his men noticed I was looking. Consider this a small demonstration of what I'm capable of, should he continue to be as difficult as he has been these past several years." "What do you want from him?" "Everything," Victor said simply, and the single word carried more menace than any threat could have. "But I'll settle, for now, for making sure he understands that nothing he loves is ever truly safe. Not while I'm still breathing." He left as calmly as he had arrived, disappearing into the ordinary bustle of the market like he had never been there at all, leaving me standing frozen in the produce aisle with a bag of apples still clutched forgotten in my hand. I don't remember walking home. I remember Adrian's men realizing something was wrong the moment I appeared at the door, my face pale, my hands shaking too hard to fit my key into the lock. I remember one of them speaking urgently into a phone, while the other guided me inside, and I remember, most of all, the sound of Adrian's car screeching to a stop outside less than 10 minutes later, faster than should have been possible from wherever he had been. He was through the door before I could stand, his hands cupping my face, checking me over with a frantic urgency that told me exactly how close his careful control had come to shattering entirely. "Are you hurt? Elena, look at me. Are you hurt anywhere?" "I'm fine." He didn't touch me, he just talked. What did he say? His voice was low and dangerous now, all the warmth I had grown used to replaced by something colder, something that made me understand, for the first time, exactly why an entire club had gone quiet the night he crossed the room toward me. I told him everything, every word Victor Kane had said, and watched Adrian's jaw tighten with each sentence, until I thought the muscle might snap from the strain. When I finished, he pulled me against his chest, holding me so tightly I could feel his heart hammering just as hard as mine. "This is my fault," he said into my hair. "I let myself believe I had more time than I did. I should have moved you somewhere safer the moment I saw that man outside your building. You can't blame yourself for what he did. I can, and I do." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes darker than I had ever seen them, grief and fury tangled together into something almost unbearable to witness. "I told you I would burn this city down before I let anything happen to you. I meant it then. I mean it more now." That night, he did not leave. He stayed on my couch with a gun resting on the table beside him, awake long after I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, and when I woke before dawn to find him still there, still watching the door like Victor Kane might walk through it at any moment, I understood that the quiet, ordinary life I had once complained about was gone completely, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more real than anything I had ever known before. In the morning, he made coffee in my small kitchen, like he had done it 100 times before, moving through the unfamiliar space with the same quiet certainty he carried everywhere. I watched him from the doorway, struck by how strange it was to see a man capable of such fear in other people standing barefoot at my counter, sleeves rolled up, exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, not turning around, as though he had felt me watching. "I assumed you'd tell me to stay inside for the rest of my life." I considered it. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth as he finally turned, holding out a cup toward me. "But I don't think you'd listen, and I think I've finally learned better than to ask you to be someone you're not." I took the cup, grateful for the warmth against my still shaking hands. "Then what?" "Then we changed the terms," he said. "Victor found a gap because my men grew comfortable, because I let myself believe a market 3 blocks from your apartment was safe simply because it was familiar. That mistake doesn't happen again. From today, you have someone with you every moment you're outside these walls, someone trained, someone who won't blink if Victor's people try that again. That sounds like a cage with better manners." "It's not a cage." His jaw tightened, frustration and fear tangled together in the set of his shoulders. "It's the only way I know how to keep you breathing, Elena. I have buried people I loved because I believed the world was safer than it actually was. I won't make that mistake with you." I set the cup down and crossed the small kitchen to stand in front of him, close enough to see the exhaustion he was trying to hide behind his usual composure. "I'm not asking you to let me wander around unprotected. I'm asking you not to disappear into guilt every time something goes wrong. Victor Kane did this, not you. He did it because of me. He did it because he's cruel," I said firmly. "You don't get to carry that like it's yours to carry alone." Something in his expression softened, just slightly, the tension easing out of his shoulders as he reached up to brush his thumb along my cheek. "You are far too generous with a man who dragged you into all of this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I stayed because I wanted to." I held his gaze, steady despite the fear still humming under my skin from the day before. That's still true, even now, especially now. He kissed me then, slow and certain, nothing like the brief press of lips to my forehead that first night. It felt less like comfort, and more like a promise renewed. A line drawn again now that both of us understood exactly how much was at stake on either side of it. Later that day, a new guard arrived at my door, a woman this time, sharp-eyed and quiet, introduced only as Priya. She had a way of scanning every room before stepping fully inside it, a habit I found unsettling until I understood it was the reason Adrian trusted her enough to place her closest to me. She walked me to work that morning, matching my pace without conversation, her attention split evenly between me and every stranger who passed within 10 feet of us. "Does it ever feel strange to you?" I asked her, as we waited at a crosswalk. "Watching people like this, all the time?" "It used to," she said, her eyes still moving, still scanning. "Now it feels like breathing." "Are you afraid of Victor Kane?" She considered the question longer than I expected, weighing her answer the same careful way Adrian weighed his. "I'm afraid of what he's willing to do to prove a point," she finally said. "Men like Adrian build their power on strength. Men like Victor build theirs on fear. That makes him unpredictable in ways strength never is." Her words stayed with me the rest of the day, settling into the same cold place in my chest, where Victor's voice still echoed, pleasant and cruel in equal measure. That evening, Adrian returned looking older than he had that morning, the kind of exhaustion that comes from hours spent making calls I wasn't allowed to hear the details of, arranging pieces of a war I had unknowingly become the center of. "I spoke with people I trust," he said, sitting heavily beside me on the couch. "Victor won't move against you directly again. Not yet. He got what he wanted from that encounter, which was proving he could reach you at all. He'll wait now. Let the fear do its work. Watch how it changes what I'm willing to risk to keep you safe." "And what are you willing to risk?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering, his expression unguarded in a way I had rarely seen from him. "Everything," he said simply. "Which is exactly what worries me most, because a man willing to risk everything makes mistakes a careful man never would." "Then don't be careless. Be smart instead." A tired laugh escaped him, low and genuine. "You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's necessary." I laced my fingers through his, holding on tightly, needing the contact as much for my own steadiness as for his. I didn't fall for a man who burns everything down without thinking. I fell for someone who protects what matters to him without losing himself in the process. Don't let Victor turn you into someone else. He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Maybe not," I said, allowing myself a small, tired smile, despite everything the day had cost us both. "But you have me anyway." We sat together in the quiet that followed, neither of us speaking, both of us aware that somewhere across the city, Victor Kane was already planning his next move, patient and cruel, willing to wait exactly as long as it took to find another gap in the careful world Adrian had built around me. I did not yet know how soon that patience would run out, or how close the next confrontation would come to costing me everything I had only just begun to want. The message came from a number I recognized, and that was the first mistake I made. It looked like it came from Nora, her name attached to the contact, her usual way of texting, short and urgent. "Come to the old warehouse on Miller Street," it read. "Something happened. Please hurry. Don't tell anyone yet." I read it twice, my stomach twisting, and did not stop to wonder why Nora would ask me to hide something from Adrian, why she would choose a warehouse instead of calling, why the message felt, in hindsight, just slightly wrong in a way fear made easy to ignore. Priya was in the other room when I slipped out, telling her only that I needed air, a small, cowardly lie that would haunt me for weeks afterward. I took a cab instead of waiting for Adrian's car, giving the driver an address I had never heard before, my hands cold and trembling around my phone, as I tried and failed to reach Nora directly. The warehouse was exactly as abandoned as its name suggested, dark and silent, the kind of place light seemed reluctant to enter even in daylight. I stepped inside, calling Nora's name, my voice swallowed almost instantly by the vast empty space, and understood, far too late, that I had walked directly into the trap Adrian had spent weeks trying to protect me from. "She's not here," Victor Kane said, stepping out of the shadows with the same pleasant, cruel smile I remembered from the market. "I borrowed her number. People are remarkably careless about protecting things like that when they're not expecting to need protection." My blood turned to ice. I turned toward the door, already calculating the distance, already understanding it was too far, that the two men who stepped into the doorway behind me had closed off my only exit before I had even realized I needed one. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Won't I?" Victor tilted his head, amused. "Adrian has spent years believing he could protect everything he loves through strength alone. I'm simply here to teach him, one more time, that strength has limits. He gestured to the men behind me, and I felt hands close around my arms before I could react, firm and unyielding. Don't struggle. It will only make this more unpleasant than it needs to be. I did struggle anyway, some desperate animal instinct refusing to go quietly, no matter how hopeless the odds. It earned me nothing but a tighter grip and a low warning from the man holding me, but I didn't stop until Victor's voice cut through my panic, sharp and commanding. Enough. I have no intention of hurting you, unless he forces my hand. You're far more valuable to me breathing, as leverage, than you are as a lesson. He pulled out his phone, unhurried, and I understood with sick clarity that he was calling Adrian himself, staging the moment for maximum effect. Now we simply wait. The wait felt endless, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib, my mind cycling through every version of how this could end, none of them good. Victor spoke calmly into the phone, telling Adrian exactly where to find us, exactly how many men to leave behind if he wanted to see me again, savoring every second of Adrian's fury audible even from where I stood. Adrian arrived faster than should have been possible, the warehouse door slamming open hard enough to echo through the empty space. He came alone, as instructed, though I could see the barely restrained violence in every line of his body, the careful composure I had grown used to completely stripped away. Let her go, Victor. This is between us. It always has been. Has it? Victor's smile didn't waver, though something colder entered his voice. You made it about her, the moment you claimed her in front of an entire club. You wanted everyone to know she belonged to you. Congratulations. Now everyone knows exactly where to strike. I will burn everything you have to the ground. You keep saying that. Victor's laugh was soft, almost bored. And yet here we are, and I am still the one holding what matters most to you. My eyes found Adrian's across the warehouse, and even in the middle of the terror gripping every part of me, I saw something steady there, a promise passing between us without a single word spoken. He would not let this end the way Victor intended. Whatever it cost him, he would not let it end here. What do you want? Adrian asked, his voice dropping into something dangerously calm. Everything you've built, Victor said simply. Your territories, your contracts, your name, erased from every conversation that matters in this city. Sign it over, and she walks out of here untouched. Refuse, and I promise you'll understand exactly how much worse this can become. I watched something break and reform in Adrian's expression, grief and fury tangled together, weighed against an impossible choice. And then, slowly, he reached into his jacket, and I understood, with rising horror, that he intended to agree, to sacrifice everything he had built to save my life. Adrian, no, I said, my voice cracking through the tense silence. Don't you dare give him what he wants because of me. Elena. He's using me because he knows you'll do exactly this, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice, despite the hands still gripping my arms too tightly. Don't prove him right. Victor's smile thinned, irritation flickering across his composed features for the first time since he had emerged from the shadows. How touching. But this isn't her decision to make. Actually, said a voice from the doorway behind Adrian, calm and sharp, I think it might be. Priya stepped into the warehouse with 3 of Adrian's men flanking her, their weapons already raised, their formation precise in a way that told me this was not luck but preparation, a contingency Adrian must have set the moment he learned where to find me. The man holding my right arm hesitated, glancing toward Victor for direction, and in that single moment of hesitation, I twisted free enough to drop low, out of the immediate line of sight, just as Adrian moved. What happened next unfolded too fast for me to fully process. A blur of motion and shouted commands, Adrian closing the distance to Victor with a speed that belied the careful composure he usually wore like armor. I heard Victor's voice rise in genuine surprise for the first time since he had stepped out of the shadows, heard the scuffle of feet against concrete, heard Priya's voice cutting through the chaos with sharp, controlled instructions to the men still holding me. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Victor lay pinned against the cold concrete floor, Adrian's forearm pressed hard against his throat, his face inches away, dark with a fury I had never seen in him before, and hoped never to see again. You touched what's mine, Adrian said, low and lethal. You made a mistake you're not going to survive long enough to regret. Kill me then, Victor rasped, defiant even pinned and outnumbered, and prove to everyone exactly what kind of monster you really are. I don't know how long the silence stretched after that, Adrian's arm trembling with the effort of restraint, every instinct in him clearly screaming to finish what Victor had started. It was my voice, shaking but certain, that finally broke through. Adrian, look at me. He didn't move at first, his focus locked entirely on the man beneath him, but slowly, his eyes found mine across the warehouse, and something in my expression must have reached him, because the pressure of his arm eased, just slightly. Don't become what he wants you to become, I said. Not for him, for me. The silence stretched again, tighter now, Adrian's jaw working as he fought some private battle I couldn't fully see. Then, finally, he pulled back, releasing Victor onto the concrete with a final contemptuous shove, though the fury in his eyes hadn't cooled by a single degree. Take him, he said to his men, his voice hoarse. He answers for this properly. Not here. Not like this. They dragged Victor away, his composure finally, thoroughly broken, shouting threats that grew fainter as they pulled him toward the door. Adrian crossed the warehouse to me in 3 long strides, pulling me against him so tightly I could barely breathe, his hands moving over my face and arms with the same frantic urgency I remembered from the day of the market. I'm fine, I said, my voice muffled against his chest, tears finally breaking free now that the danger had passed. I'm fine, Adrian. You are never doing that again, he said, his voice rough, his arms tightening further around me. You are never leaving without Priya again. Not for anyone, not for any message. Do you understand me? I understand. I pulled back just enough to look up at him, my hands framing his face the way his had so often framed mine. I'm sorry. I saw Nora's name, and I stopped thinking clearly. It's not your fault, he said, though the tightness in his voice told me he was still fighting the urge to blame himself instead, the same guilt that had haunted him since the day outside my apartment. It's mine. I should have anticipated this. I should have protected you better. You did protect me, I said firmly. You came. You didn't give him what he wanted, and you didn't become what he wanted either. That's not failure, Adrian. That's exactly the man I fell for. He kissed me then, desperate and grateful, right there in the middle of the cold, empty warehouse, and I understood, standing in the wreckage of a night that could have ended so much worse, that whatever came next, whatever price Victor Kane's defeat would ultimately demand, I did not regret a single choice that had led me to this moment, held tightly in the arms of a man who would burn down the world before he let anyone take me from him again. Priya drove us both back to my apartment, her usual sharp watchfulness softened just slightly by relief, though her eyes still scanned every street corner out of habit too deep to break even, now that the immediate danger had passed. Adrian sat beside me in the back seat, his hand never leaving mine, his thumb moving in slow, absent circles against my knuckles, like he needed the constant contact to convince himself I was truly there. Nora called the moment we arrived, frantic, having finally noticed the strange messages sent from her number, while her phone sat forgotten in her bag during a meeting she hadn't been able to leave. I spent nearly an hour on the phone reassuring her I was safe, listening to her cycle through guilt and fury in equal measure, promising her over and over that none of it had been her fault, that Victor Kane had simply been clever and cruel in ways neither of us could have anticipated. I should never have let you go anywhere alone, Adrian said, once I finally set the phone down, his voice quiet in the dim light of my living room. Not after the market. I told myself one more guard would be enough. I was wrong. You can't guard against every possible trick, I said, settling beside him on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that had carried me through the worst of the night. Victor knew exactly which weakness to exploit. That's not a failure of planning. That's just how dangerous he is. That's not comforting. I told you before, I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to keep you honest. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the tension slowly ease out of him as the minutes passed, the adrenaline of the warehouse fading into something closer to exhausted relief. What happens to him now? Adrian was quiet for a long moment before answering. He'll answer for tonight properly, through channels that don't involve either of us standing over him in an abandoned warehouse. It won't be quick, and it won't be quiet, but it will be final. Men like Victor don't stop because they're frightened. They stop because there's nothing left for them to threaten anyone with. And his men? The ones still loyal to him? Some will scatter. Some will try to take his place. A humorless smile touched his mouth. It's an old cycle, Elena. I've watched it happen before, on both sides. Tonight doesn't end it completely, but it ends the immediate threat to you. And for now, that's the only piece of it I care about. I thought about the fear that had gripped me the moment I stepped into that warehouse, the cold certainty that I might not walk out of it at all, and found, to my own surprise, that the fear had already begun to soften into something steadier, something closer to resolve. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life afraid of what might happen next, I said. I decided that somewhere between Victor's phone call and you walking through that door, you should be allowed to be afraid, after everything tonight. I am afraid, I admitted, but I'm more afraid of losing this, of losing you, than I am of Victor Kane or anyone like him. That fear is bigger. It's the one I'm choosing to listen to. He turned to look at me then, something unguarded and raw, moving behind his eyes, the same expression I had glimpsed only once before, in the quiet hours after Victor first approached me in the market. Do you understand what you're choosing, Elena? Truly? This life doesn't get gentler from here. It only asks for more. I understand it better than I did a month ago, I said, and I'm still here. He pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to the top of my head, holding me the way you hold something you nearly lost and have only just gotten back. We sat together in the quiet apartment, long after Priya had taken up a silent post outside my door, neither of us speaking, both of us aware that the night's danger had passed, but that something larger, something neither of us had fully named yet, was still waiting on the other side of everything we had survived together. Glass shattered somewhere behind me, and I dropped to the floor before I even understood why. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse, 3 weeks of careful, watchful peace that I had slowly, foolishly allowed myself to trust. I was in Adrian's kitchen, alone for the first time in days because Priya had finally, reluctantly, agreed I could survive 20 minutes without an escort while making coffee in a house full of armed men. That was when the window above the sink exploded inward, glass raining across the counter, and a shout went up somewhere near the front of the house that sent every nerve in my body into cold, immediate panic. I did not need anyone to tell me Victor Kane's people had found a way back in. I had lived with that fear long enough to recognize its arrival, the moment it finally came. Adrian's men moved fast, shouting instructions to each other, one of them pulling me flat against the cabinets and away from the shattered window, while another disappeared toward the sound of the disturbance at the front of the house. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat, my hands pressed flat against the cold tile floor, every instinct screaming at me to run, and every rational part of my mind insisting that running was the fastest way to get myself killed. "Stay down," the man beside me hissed, his weapon already raised toward the doorway. "Don't move until someone tells you it's clear." I stayed down. I don't know how long I crouched there, glass glittering across the floor beside me, listening to shouted commands and heavy footsteps thundering through rooms I couldn't see, my whole body braced for the sound of gunfire that never quite seemed to stop threatening to arrive. When Adrian finally burst into the kitchen, his face pale with a fear I had only seen from him once before, in the warehouse weeks earlier, I nearly wept with relief, simply at the sight of him. "Elena," he crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling me up and against him so tightly I could barely breathe. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt." I'm fine, Adrian." My voice shook, despite my best effort to steady it. "What happened?" "A message," he said grimly, glancing toward the shattered window, "delivered the way Victor's people always deliver messages, when they want to remind me they're still capable of reaching further than I'd like to believe." It turned out to be exactly that. A warning shot fired through a window with no intention of hitting anyone, a final, desperate demonstration from a man whose empire had been steadily crumbling in the weeks since the warehouse. Adrian's men found the shooter within the hour, one of Victor's last loyal soldiers, already abandoned by the rest of Victor's scattering organization, and desperate enough to attempt one final act of defiance, before Adrian's reach closed around him completely. But the message accomplished exactly what it intended. It told Adrian, in the clearest possible terms, that Victor Kane had one card left to play, and that he intended to play it soon, before what remained of his power dissolved entirely. "He's cornered," Adrian said that night, pacing the length of his study while I watched from the doorway, still shaken from the afternoon's violence. A cornered man does the most dangerous things imaginable, because he has nothing left to lose. What does he want now? The same thing he's always wanted. Adrian stopped pacing, turning to face me, exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. But this time, he doesn't have the patience or the resources to plan something as careful as the warehouse. This time, whatever he does, it will be reckless, and reckless men make mistakes that get people killed. Including you. Including me, he admitted, crossing the room to take my hands in his. Which is why I need you somewhere safer than this house, at least until this ends completely. I have a property outside the city, quiet, defensible, somewhere Victor's remaining people don't know to look. I understood the fear driving the request, understood it deeply enough that some exhausted part of me wanted to agree immediately, simply to give him one less thing to worry about. But I had learned enough about myself over the past weeks to know that hiding, however safe it might feel, was not a life I could sustain, and not one I wanted to build a future on. "I'll go," I said, watching relief flood his features before I continued. "On one condition. You let me help end this properly, instead of simply waiting somewhere safe while you handle it alone." "Elena, that's not—" "I'm not asking to fight anyone," I said quickly, before his protective instincts could fully take over the conversation. "I'm asking you to trust me with more than half the truth for once. Victor targeted me because he knew it would fracture your judgment. If I understand exactly what's happening, exactly what he's planning, maybe I can help you think clearly, instead of simply reacting out of fear for me." He studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, that the woman standing in front of him was no longer the same person who had walked into that club months earlier, uncertain and easily overwhelmed by a world she didn't understand. "You've changed," he said quietly. "So have you," I said. "We don't get to go back to who we were before this started. I think the only way through is forward, together, with both of us seeing the whole picture." He exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he nodded. "All right, together then. But you still go to the property outside the city. That part isn't negotiable." I didn't argue. Some battles were worth choosing carefully, and I understood that this one, at least, came from love rather than control. The final confrontation arrived 4 days later, faster than either of us expected, forced by Victor's dwindling resources and mounting desperation. He made one last attempt to reach me, a message delivered through an old contact of Nora's who had no idea the favor she was doing came wrapped in danger, luring me with a story about Nora needing help urgently, the same trick that had worked once before, and that Victor, in his desperation, gambled would work again. This time, I recognized it immediately. This time, instead of running toward danger alone, I called Adrian the moment the message arrived, watching his expression shift from concern to grim, focused resolve as he listened to the details. "He's using the same trick because he's out of new ones," Adrian said, already moving toward the door, already calling instructions to the men stationed throughout the property. "That tells me exactly how little he has left. Stay here. I mean that, Elena. Let me finish this." "I'm not staying behind this time," I said, following him toward the door, despite Priya's protesting hand on my arm. "You said we do this together." "Together doesn't mean walking into the same warehouse twice." "It doesn't have to be the warehouse," I said, "but I'm not hiding while you face him alone. Not again." We compromised, in the end, the only way two stubborn people ever truly compromise, with neither of us fully satisfied. I would come, but I would stay in the car with Priya, close enough to be reached quickly, far enough to stay out of immediate danger, while Adrian and his men moved in to intercept Victor before he could set his final trap in motion. The location Victor had chosen turned out to be a small, abandoned building near the docks, close enough to the water that I could smell salt through the car's cracked window as we approached, close enough to hear, faintly, the confrontation unfolding inside, once Adrian's men breached the building. I sat rigid in the back seat, Priya beside me with her weapon drawn, and her eyes fixed on the entrance, every second stretching longer than the one before it. When the shouting finally stopped, The silence that followed felt worse than the noise had. A silence I couldn't interpret, couldn't be certain, didn't mean the worst possible outcome had already happened. I didn't wait for Priya's permission before scrambling out of the car, ignoring her sharp warning behind me, my feet carrying me toward the building faster than caution should have allowed. Adrian met me at the door before I could go any further inside, his shirt torn at the shoulder, a shallow cut along his cheekbone, but alive, standing, his eyes finding mine with a fierce, relieved intensity that told me, before he said a single word, that it was finally over. "Victor?" I asked, breathless. "Won't be threatening anyone again," Adrian said simply, and something in the flat certainty of his voice told me not to ask for further details, that some things were better left unspoken, tucked away in the same careful silence he kept around the darker corners of the world he inhabited. He pulled me against him despite his injuries, holding on tightly enough that I felt the tremor still running through him, the aftershock of violence finally beginning to fade now that the danger had passed completely. We stood together outside that small, forgotten building near the water for a long time, neither of us speaking, both of us simply breathing in the reality that we had survived, that the shadow hanging over every quiet moment for months had finally, truly lifted. In the days that followed the confrontation near the docks, I watched Adrian move through a version of his world I had never fully witnessed before, careful and methodical, dismantling whatever remained of Victor's influence, without the reckless fury that had nearly consumed him in the warehouse months earlier. He met with people whose names I never learned, spoke in low, measured tones behind closed doors, and returned to me each evening, looking a little less burdened than the night before, as though some heavy weight he had carried for years was finally, slowly being set down. "It's strange," he admitted one night, sitting across from me at his kitchen table, a rare, quiet evening, with no guards stationed just beyond the door for the first time in months. "I spent so long believing this feud would define the rest of my life. I didn't know what came after winning it. I'm not entirely certain I do yet." "What do you want to come after it?" I asked. He considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things, turning it over before answering. "Something quieter," he said finally, "something that doesn't require a war to justify why I hold on to the people I love as tightly as I do." His eyes met mine across the table, warm in a way that still, even now, made my breath catch slightly. "I want mornings like this one, ordinary, unremarkable. I spent so long thinking those were beneath a man like me. I don't think that anymore. You're allowed to want ordinary things, Adrian. Even men who burn down cities." He laughed, low and genuine, a sound I had grown to treasure, precisely because it came so rarely, reserved for moments when the careful armor he wore in front of the rest of the world finally slipped away completely. "I never burned down a city," he pointed out. "You threatened to, several times, quite convincingly." "I meant every threat," he said, though the warmth in his voice undercut the danger of the words entirely. "I simply found better ways to keep those promises than I expected to need." Nora visited soon after, cautious at first, still carrying guilt over the message that had lured me into the warehouse months earlier, despite my repeated assurances that none of it had ever been her fault. She sat across from me in my apartment, studying Adrian across the room with the same wary assessment she had shown that very first night in the club, though something in her expression had softened considerably since then. "You look happy," she said finally, once Adrian had stepped out to take a call, leaving the two of us alone for the first time in weeks. "Genuinely happy, not just safe, happy." "I am," I admitted, a little surprised by how easily the truth came. "I know it doesn't make sense from the outside. I know everything about this should have scared me away instead of pulling me closer." "Maybe," Nora said, tilting her head thoughtfully, "or maybe you just needed someone who actually looked at you, instead of past you, for once in your life." She reached across and squeezed my hand, her earlier wariness finally giving way to something like acceptance. "I still think you're both a little insane, but I've never seen you like this before, Elena. Whatever this is, it's real." "It's real," I agreed, and meant it completely. Weeks passed after that, quieter weeks, ordinary in a way neither of us had experienced since the night in that first club. Adrian's world settled into something calmer, the power vacuum left by Victor's fall absorbed carefully, deliberately, without the chaos that might have followed a less careful man's victory. I returned to my own life gradually, my own apartment, my own routines, though rarely a day passed without Adrian somewhere nearby, no longer out of necessity, but simply because neither of us wanted the distance anymore. One evening, months after that first night in the club, he took me back to the same rooftop, the same space where a stranger's hand had once closed around my wrist and changed the entire shape of my life. The club looked different in the early evening light, quieter, the crowd not yet arrived, the space almost peaceful in its emptiness. "Why here?" I asked, watching him move to stand at the railing overlooking the city, the same railing near the booth where he had first crossed the room toward me. "Because this is where it started," he said, turning to face me, something nervous flickering behind his usual composure for the first time since I had known him. "And I wanted to ask you something, in the place where I first decided I couldn't let you walk away from me." He reached into his pocket, and I understood, watching his hand emerge, exactly what he was about to do, my breath catching somewhere between disbelief and certainty. "I'm not a gentle man, Elena," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly moving beneath it. "I told you that first night that nobody looks at what's mine, and I meant every word of it, though I understand now that claiming you was never really about ownership. It was about recognizing something rare enough that I refused to let it slip past me unnoticed." He opened the small box in his hand, the ring inside catching the fading light. "I'm asking you now, properly, with everything you know about who I am and what this life demands. Will you be mine, not because I claimed you in a crowded room, but because you choose it, fully, with open eyes?" I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the fear of that first night, the danger that had followed, the warehouse and the shattered window, and every terrifying transformative choice that had led us both to this exact spot. None of it had been simple. None of it had been safe. And yet standing there, looking at the man who had rearranged the entire shape of my life the moment he draped his jacket over my shoulders, I understood that I would choose this exact path again, every time, without hesitation. "Yes," I said, and the word came out steady, certain, exactly the way his had that first night. "I choose you. I choose all of it." He slid the ring onto my finger, with hands that trembled slightly, the first genuine unsteadiness I had ever witnessed in him, and when he kissed me, right there at the railing where everything had begun, I felt the whole city stretching out beneath us, wide and glittering, and finally, completely safe. The whispers that had once followed his name through crowded rooms would likely never fully disappear, and I understood by now that I had not fallen for a simple man or an easy life. But standing there in his arms, wrapped once again in the promise he had made that very first night, I understood something else far more clearly than I ever had before. Nobody would ever look at what was his again without understanding, completely, that I had chosen to stay exactly where I belonged.